Jessica Long wanted a quiet life. Adam Crane wanted control. One of them vanished without a trace and the other almost got away with murder. But when a drunk stranger named Trevor Laskin bragged about something he should never have known, a single slip of the tongue unraveled everything. Millfield was a place where people believed danger belonged on the other side of the television screen. A small town nestled between forested hills and farmlands, it had more churches than traffic lights and the kind of community where everyone knew everyone else's dog by name. Summers were slow, the kind of slow where kids rode bikes till sunset. And neighbors left pies on each other's porches just because. The town didn't have much history with crime, certainly nothing serious, until Jessica Long vanished without a trace. Jessica was the kind of person people noticed. Not because she sought attention, but because she was steady, kind, and dependable. She taught English at Millfield High, where students adored her and parents trusted her. She volunteered at the library on weekends and coached the school's debate team. She wasn't flashy, but she lit up any room she entered with a calm, easy presence. Jessica had recently gotten engaged to Adam Crane, a quiet, broad-shouldered mechanic who ran his late father's auto shop. Together, they seemed like the town's golden couple, two steady, hard-working people building a life in a place where dreams were simple and expectations stayed low. That's why her sudden disappearance felt like a jolt to the town's heart. On the morning of July 11th, Jessica didn't show up to work. No call, no message. At first, her colleagues thought she might be sick or had overslept. But as the hours passed and no one could reach her, worry started to creep in. A co-worker drove to her house during lunch and knocked on the door. Her car was parked in the driveway. Curtains drawn. Mail still in the box. No answer. By afternoon, the police were called. When officers entered Jessica's house that evening, there was no sign of a break-in. Her purse was on the kitchen counter, phone charging beside it, and her keys were in their usual place. The bed was made. A cup of half-drunk coffee sat cold on the table. It looked like she'd been in the middle of her morning routine, then simply vanished. The search began immediately. Volunteers combed nearby parks, creeks, and the woods behind her neighborhood. Helicopters circled. Posters went up on telephone poles. The local diner gave out free coffee to anyone helping with the search. But as days turned into weeks, leads dried up. No credit card activity. No phone usage. No security footage showing her leaving town. Jessica was simply gone. As the town tried to carry on, unease settled into its bones. The porch light stayed on longer at night. Locks got checked twice. Parents walked their kids to school instead of letting them ride alone. And although no one said it out loud, many had begun to suspect that something terrible had happened to Jessica Long, and that someone in Millfield might know more than they were saying. The peace Millfield once took for granted had shattered. All it took was one missing person to remind them that darkness didn't need a big city to hide. Sometimes it lived right next door. In the weeks following Jessica's disappearance, the search for answers turned inward. The community, once so tightly woven, began to fray. People grew suspicious, not just of strangers, but of neighbors they'd known for years. Whispered theories passed through church parking lots and grocery store aisles. Everyone wanted to believe Jessica had simply left town, overwhelmed or in need of a fresh start. But deep down, no one really believed that. She wouldn't have left without saying goodbye. Investigators looked into every part of Jessica's life. Her phone records were combed through, her emails examined, and her financial transactions scrutinized. Nothing stood out until they discovered the hidden folder on her laptop. Titled simply Private, it had been tucked away in a corner of her hard drive, encrypted with a password. With the help of digital forensics, the folder was eventually opened. Inside were dozens of screenshots of messages from an unknown number, all from the weeks leading up to her disappearance. The messages were unsettling. They started out emotional, even desperate, pleading with Jessica to reconsider, to talk things through. But over time, the tone shifted. The messages became accusatory, angry, and increasingly erratic. Whoever had sent them seemed convinced that Jessica had betrayed them. Most disturbing of all, there were threats buried between the lines, veiled, but unmistakable. Phrases like "you don't know what I'm capable of," and "if I can't have your truth, no one will," sent chills down the investigators' spines. The number wasn't registered under any name and had been connected to a prepaid phone, bought in cash at a gas station 2 towns away. With no way to track the user, investigators had to rely on old-fashioned deduction. They began compiling a list of people close to Jessica: co-workers, students, neighbors, and of course, Adam Crane. Adam had been cooperative from day one. He cried during press conferences, joined the search parties, and allowed police full access to his home and devices. But when investigators asked him about the messages, he claimed to know nothing. He denied ever using a burner phone and insisted that he and Jessica had been happy. Still, something felt off. A colleague of Jessica's had come forward saying they'd seen Adam arguing with her in the school parking lot just days before she vanished. Another neighbor mentioned hearing raised voices one evening, though they hadn't thought much of it at the time. With no hard evidence linking Adam to the messages, the case stalled again. But now there was tension between the lines. People who once stood by Adam's side began to question his story. His behavior, once seen as grieving, began to feel rehearsed. The town's sympathy began to splinter. As weeks turned into a month, frustration grew. Jessica's face remained on missing person posters, but hope was fading. The phone messages suggested someone had been watching her, possibly even stalking her. Someone who knew her routines. Someone close. But without a clear suspect, the case hovered in limbo, caught between silence and suspicion, waiting for a single clue to tip the scales. 3 months after Jessica's disappearance, Millfield had settled into a quiet kind of despair. Her face still looked down from posters in shop windows, but the urgency in people's eyes had dimmed. The case felt stuck, with no new leads and no signs of progress. Then, completely by accident, everything changed. It happened in a bar over an hour away from Millfield, in the small town of Ridgewood. A man named Trevor Laskin, recently released from jail after serving time for petty theft, was drinking heavily at a local dive. He was loud, unfiltered, and clearly looking to impress the 2 men sitting next to him. Slurring his words, he began boasting about things he claimed to know, about crimes, people he'd helped, and how he was once involved in a situation that made the news. One sentence stopped everything. Trevor said, loud enough to be overheard, that he knew what really happened to that teacher girl from Millfield. He claimed she wasn't missing, not really. She was taken care of, and her fiancé wasn't as innocent as everyone thought. The 2 men he was talking to weren't just bar regulars, they were off-duty police officers from Ridgewood. They didn't react, didn't reveal who they were. They simply listened. When Trevor stepped outside for a smoke, one of the officers called it in. Within hours, Trevor was taken into custody. At first, he acted cocky and dismissive, brushing off his statements as drunk talk. But when pressed harder, his tone changed. He admitted that he had known Adam Crane, had met him through a mutual acquaintance months earlier. Trevor claimed that Adam had approached him with a request that sounded simple at first but quickly became disturbing. According to Trevor, Adam had asked him to intimidate Jessica. Nothing violent, just enough to shake her up, to convince her to stay in the relationship and abandon whatever plans she had to leave. Trevor said he'd agreed, even bought a burner phone to send Jessica those eerie messages, pretending to be someone else watching her. He swore he never actually approached her in person. He only sent messages and eventually stopped when he got spooked by news of her disappearance. He insisted he had nothing to do with what ultimately happened to her. The story was alarming, but still unproven. Investigators checked phone records and locations but couldn't definitively connect Trevor to the burner phone. His DNA wasn't found at Jessica's home nor on her belongings. And while his claims added a new layer to the case, they didn't bring them any closer to finding Jessica or proving how she vanished. Still, Trevor's so-called slip of the tongue had reopened the investigation. It refocused attention on Adam, and now detectives started looking deeper into his alibi and behavior. The truth wasn't clear yet, but the lie Trevor told, whether real or just invented to impress strangers, was enough to breathe life back into the case. And that alone was more than Millfield had seen in months. With renewed attention on Adam Crane, investigators dug deeper, this time with sharper eyes and fewer assumptions. His past interviews were reviewed. His alibis were rechecked. A timeline was reconstructed, hour by hour, on the day Jessica disappeared. On the surface, Adam's version of events remained the same. He had gone to work early that morning, stayed until late afternoon, and returned home to find Jessica missing. But small inconsistencies began to surface. One of his co-workers recalled Adam stepping out for a long break that day, which wasn't unusual, but hadn't been mentioned before. Security footage from a nearby gas station confirmed he'd been out, purchasing gloves, a tarp, and a shovel. The timestamp on the receipt placed him away from the shop during a key window when Jessica had likely disappeared. Investigators obtained a search warrant for Adam's workshop, a cluttered garage tucked behind the house he grew up in. It was a place filled with grease-stained tools and old car parts, nothing unusual on the surface. But one detective noticed a section of the wall that didn't quite line up with the rest, slightly off in color, newer wood used for repairs. Behind that patch was a hidden compartment. Inside, they found a small cardboard box sealed with duct tape. It contained Jessica's engagement ring, a scarf with what appeared to be dried blood, and her diary. The discovery changed everything. Forensics confirmed the blood on the scarf was Jessica's. The diary, meanwhile, painted a disturbing picture of her final weeks. Jessica had written about feeling watched, about missing items in her home, about Adam showing up unexpectedly in places he shouldn't have been. She never directly accused him of abuse, but the fear in her writing was clear. She wrote that she was planning to end the relationship quietly after summer break. She had even made notes about where she might move and how to tell her parents without causing panic. With the diary and other physical evidence in hand, Adam was arrested. But even then, he denied harming Jessica. He stuck to his original story until confronted with the contents of the box. After a long silence, he changed his account. He claimed there had been a terrible accident. According to him, they had argued that morning. Jessica had pushed past him in frustration, slipped on the kitchen floor, hit her head, and never woke up. He said panic took over. Fearing no one would believe him, he hid the body. The police weren't convinced, but his partial confession gave them one crucial thing: a location. He said he buried Jessica near an old shed behind his childhood home, a place tucked deep in the woods where no one ever went. A search team was dispatched immediately. Hours later, they found what remained of Jessica, wrapped in a tarp, just as Adam had described. The truth, long buried, had finally come to light, but not through careful planning or strategy. It had unraveled because of one overlooked detail, one small misstep in a place built on secrecy. The discovery of Jessica's remains brought closure to a town that had lived in a state of limbo for months. But even as the grave was unearthed and the final pieces fell into place, the question still lingered: why had it taken so long to find the truth? The answer, oddly enough, came back to one man and one reckless lie: Trevor Laskin's drunken confession had been the key that unlocked everything, yet it turned out to be fiction. After Adam's arrest, further investigation revealed that Trevor had never met him. There were no records, no mutual contacts, and no digital footprints linking the two. The entire story he told, about being hired to scare Jessica and sending her threatening messages, had been fabricated on the spot, likely to impress the men at the bar or to feel important. Ironically, the lie had worked. It had redirected attention toward Adam just when the case was beginning to cool. In trying to appear dangerous, Trevor had inadvertently done something truly impactful. He'd reignited an investigation that was on the brink of going cold. One slip of the tongue, a careless boast, had pushed detectives to re-examine Adam with fresh urgency. That pressure had led to the search warrant, the hidden box, the confession, and finally, the location of Jessica's body. Adam later admitted that Jessica had confronted him about feeling watched. She'd found the burner phone he'd hidden in their home to send anonymous messages. She knew it was him. On the morning of her disappearance, she told him she was leaving for good. The argument turned violent. He hadn't planned to kill her, he claimed, but he couldn't stop himself once it started. Afterward, he had cleaned up, staged her belongings to make it look like she'd left without warning, and went to work as if it were any other day. The facade was careful, deliberate, and cold. Jessica's funeral was held a week after the discovery, attended by nearly the entire town. Her parents, pale and exhausted, stood beside her closed casket as neighbors filed past in silence. The school where she taught canceled classes for a day of remembrance. The library named a reading room in her honor. Her students painted a mural filled with symbols of peace and hope. Adam was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In court, he showed no emotion. When asked if he had anything to say, he declined. For many, his silence was confirmation of the coldness Jessica had written about in her diary, the part of him she had feared but never escaped. Millfield would never be the same. The story became a warning passed between parents, a cautionary tale whispered in classrooms and over backyard fences. Jessica Long had trusted someone she loved, and in the end, that trust was shattered. The most haunting part of the entire case wasn't just the crime itself, but how close it had come to remaining buried forever, until one meaningless lie cracked it wide open.